Geographic. There may be one or two of you who has not heard that the National Geographic celebrated its 100th anniversary in January of this year, and there may even be one or two who do not know that National Geographic magazine, the official journal of the Society, is 100 years old in October. But these centennial events make it particularly fitting that the discovery we are reporting to the members of the press who are here today was funded by a research grant from the National Geographic Society, and the work on this has been funded, in fact, going back as far as 1981. And it's particularly fitting also that the reporting of the event is in the October issue of National Geographic magazine, which is itself devoted to peoples of the earth. And this discovery sheds new light and knowledge on an ancient culture in our own Western Hemisphere. So to begin our program, I'd like to introduce the President and Chairman of the National Geographic Society, Gilbert M. Grosvenor.
Thank you, Bob. I'm especially pleased to welcome you to this press conference. Today's subject has been of special historical significance for the National Geographic Society. For 100 years, we have supported scientific research on planet Earth, its atmosphere, and the universe beyond. South America has always played an important role in this rich area of study. 76 years ago, the Society provided funding for a young American history professor by the name of Hiram Bingham to excavate the lost city of the Incas, the magnificent citadel of Machu Picchu. Today we're here to unveil another landmark discovery in Peru. This time the chief scientist receiving geographic funds is a native of Peru. You'll be meeting Walter Alva in a few moments, and he will tell you about the exciting discovery of the richest tomb ever found in the Americas. First, though, I would like to recognize the chairman of the Geographic's Committee for Research and Exploration, Dr. Melvin Payne. Mel? And I also see Barry Bishop, Dr. Barry Bishop, Vice Chairman of the committee. Barry? We are pleased to have a number of distinguished guests from Peru with us, and to recognize them, it is my pleasure to introduce to you the editor of National Geographic magazine, Mr. Wilbur E. Garrett. Bill?
Thank you, Gil. There's a lot to be done this morning. I'd like to talk more than I'm going to. This tomb, which will be discussed this morning, is really a Peruvian King Tut. It's the finest scientifically valuable tomb ever found. And as you will see soon, it's one of the most spectacular tombs. And I think it's safe to say that the world and Peru are both very lucky that Mr. Alva got there before the looters. Matter of fact, I think he was just ahead of the looters. And I've found just now that within the last week or so, they've found another indication of a tomb nearby which could be a mate for this one. But there's no question that this, as you will see, is one of the most spectacular archaeological finds of the New World. I do want to take a few minutes to introduce some of the very important and distinguished people who have helped on this project. We have with us this morning His Excellency Cesar Ataya, the Ambassador of Peru. Thank you, sir. We're also very pleased that the Honorable Herman Peralta has come up from Peru for this occasion. Dr. Peralta is the Director of the National Institute of Culture. That doesn't really say it all. He's really Minister Portfolio in charge of all museums, the cultural projects, research, and most important, the protection of the national patrimony of Peru, which this tomb is an excellent example of the good work that's being done. Thank you very much for being here with us this morning. It goes without saying that in addition to the scientific value of this tomb, there is considerable monetary value, which we'd rather not discuss, but there are people who are very concerned with that. looting of pre-Columbian gold began, I suppose, with the first Westerner that set foot in the New World. But it's been picking up in speed dramatically. And the confiscation by the U.S. Customs Service and the Justice Department in Los Angeles recently of 1,300 artifacts from Peru, many of which came from areas very near this tomb and maybe adjoining tombs, really did trigger the events which have led to this discovery. It's very, very important to all of us that we stay on top of what's happening in the looting, and I think the treaty with Peru and the United States is a fine example of how this is beginning to work to the advantage of all concerned. I also want to take this opportunity to introduce two of the people who will be working with us and have been working with us, as a matter of fact, on this project. Mr. Walter Alva, who will soon be available to answer your question, and Chris Donnan. Mr. Alva's responsible for the really fantastic excavation and presentation of this tomb, and I think also probably at some risk, because there are people who would rather do it for him and take the artifacts and the treasure to Los Angeles. Chris Donnan has had a distinguished career and has been very helpful to the Geographic. He has been an expert on the Moche culture. This is a culture which is very similar in many ways to the culture of the Nile Valley. These people lived in an alluvial fan, the river from which they took water for irrigation, and they created a very spectacular culture, which was about 1,000 years before the Incas and lasted much longer. As I said, I'm so proud of what these people have done, and we're so happy we were able to have this story, which I think is a quintessential National Geographic article with a happy ending. But I won't take any more time. Gentlemen, why don't you put yourselves at the disposal of the press? Mr. Alva, you want to? I think, yeah, why don't we do that? We'll give you a preview of what's going to be seen. Let's show the video first. Thank you.
At the heart of the irrigated fields of the Lambayeque Valley of the northwest coast of Peru stand the sacred monuments of a pre-Columbian civilization, the Moche. These pyramids lie eroded by the rain and ransacked by grave robbers in search of hidden treasures. In front of the pyramids in Sipan, an adobe structure only 33 feet high, is one of the richest tombs discovered in the Americas.
What is so remarkable about this tomb of Walter's is that piece was really so critical to reconstructing what the Moche were all about. And we really had no hope that we would ever find a tomb like that. And so often we'll excavate Moche tombs, but the tombs are of the lower class people, or say the farmers, the fishermen, and so on. And it's more difficult to see a direct correlation, but with this tomb, more so than any Moche tomb that has ever been found, the objects that come out of the ground are just exactly those objects that for years we've seen being worn by people that are engaged in different activities shown in the art. And I would say of all of the times that it was ever optimum for studying the Moche, it's right now. We have enough information so that you can start to really put the pieces together.
El año pasado
Last year,
hemos localizado uno de
we
los
made
hallazgos más
one of the
importantes
great
de los
discoveries
últimos
of
años.
recent years,
La tumba de un
the
noble,
tomb
de uno
of
de
a
los más altos
high-ranking
dignatarios de
Moche
la
noble.
cultura mochica. Nunca antes
Never
había
before had
encontrado
archaeologists
una tumba.
found such a tomb.
Hemos tenido la oportunidad de salvar este testimonio que estaba en peligro de un saqueo inminente
We
por
were able to
la
save it from
población
poor
campesina que
farmers,
rodea este lugar,
campesinos,
por
who were
desconocimiento
unaware of the tomb's
y
archaeological
también
value,
incentivada
but
por
are
los
attracted
traficantes
by the money
anticuarios,
offered by bidders
habían
of looted
procedido a
artifacts.
excavar masivamente este monumento. El personaje que hemos encontrado sepultado,
The man buried in this tomb was
acompañado
found
por
with
7
7 other skeletons.
más, es sin duda
He was
uno
a
de los
very
hombres
important man
importantes
of
de
his
su tiempo
time.
en esta región.
We call him
Le hemos
the Lord
llamado
of
el Señor de
Sipan.
Sipán.
We found the individual laid out in an extended barrel position, his head about here and feet down toward that end. And around him was this tremendous quantity of elaborate burial offerings, and there were jewelry, sets of clothing, headdresses, implements of warfare, these exquisite ear ornaments, and so on. We've never seen anything quite like that come out of the ground archaeologically, where you could actually see it in situ and brush it off right at that moment and know that it was placed in that tomb centuries before and had never been moved.
Este señor tenía poder
This
absoluto sobre la
man
vida y la
had
muerte de
absolute
sus
power
súbditos.
over the life and death
Cada
of his
vez que miro el
subjects.
esqueleto puedo
Whenever I
pensar
look at the
qué
skeleton,
apariencia tenía.
I try to
Con el
imagine what he
dibujante
looked
del
like.
museo hemos tratado de
And with a
reconstruir
draftsman's help,
el
I
rostro
try
del
to
Señor de Zipan.
reconstruct the face of the Lord of Zipan.
As in the first tomb, a skeleton stands guard over the latest find, the remains of a young Moche noble.
Es muy interesante porque cada tumba siempre tiene cosas tan sorpresivas, tan
It
nuevas.
is interesting because each tomb always has new and surprising things, like copperheads and teeth, the top 10 with smiling mouths, the bottom with a death-like expression.
Sonriente o enojado.
Smiling or mad, life or death, there's always this duality which was also found in the other tomb.
I suspect there may be as many as 10 more tombs of this high status. Already, Walter Alva and his crew who are working here have identified 4 more places in this site where they're almost certain to find unlooted tombs. That is, all of the evidence suggests that they have the same situation as they had here, and it's just a question of time until they can excavate down and find whether or not these actually contain high-status tombs.
Es importante, quizá la población a través de este hallazgo también puede encontrar la propia identidad.
It's
su propio
important that
esquema de
Peruvians
valores,
can find their own identity, values, and probably their roots through this discovery. The roots of the
Tenemos que
Peruvian
dedicar
people
casi la
are in
mayor
its
parte de
past.
nuestro tiempo
We spend most of our time reconstructing the past of the Lord of Zipan. In brief, we are almost the last servants to the Lord of
sirvientes del
Zipan.
Señor de Zipán.
Gentlemen, if you don't mind, we'll begin the press conference. In the other building, in the Explorers Hall, there's a fabulous exhibit of the Moche artifacts from this tomb, and that exhibit opens today, and we'll make sure that everybody gets a chance to see it before you're finished.
Distinguished.
En primer lugar, debo hacer llegar mi profundo agradecimiento a nombre de la nación peruana y de la arqueología del Perú,
First of all, I would like to express my thanks on behalf of Peruvian archaeology and
National
of Peru
Geographic, por la posibilidad que nos brinda de poner ante los ojos del mundo este importante descubrimiento.
to National Geographic Society for the opportunity they have given to us to unveil this incredible find to the world.
Y también ante los ojos del mundo lo que significa el pasado del Perú y una de sus más importantes culturas.
And also to reveal to the world part of Peru's past and one of its most important cultures,
Los Moche.
the Moche people.
En julio del año pasado tuvimos la oportunidad de revelar a lo largo de cerca de 10 meses la importante cámara funeraria de uno de los personajes más altos de la jerarquía mochica.
Last year, during the month of July, we were able to gradually open the tomb of one of the most important people in the Moche culture.
Se conocía de su maravilloso arte, de su cerámica esplendorosa, con imágenes fuertemente figurativas y de gran expresividad.
We were already familiar with their art, which was quite sophisticated and had a great deal of figures in it. And in this tomb, we have been able to find more of it,
donde podía deducirse una organización social y política basada en una alta jerarquía religiosa y militar.
Through their art, we were able to tell about their social and political organization, which was deeply rooted in religion.
En las maravillosas esculturas de barro podíamos ver muchos personajes altivos, que sin duda eran los reyes de la época.
In their pottery, we were able to see important figures which were undoubtedly the kings of their time.
Pero jamás científicamente se había encontrado una tumba
But we had never found a tomb to be studied scientifically
de estos reyes.
of these kings.
Finalmente, en julio, tuvimos la oportunidad de abrir la cámara funeraria
Finally, in July, we had the opportunity of opening the funerary chamber
importante personaje mochica.
of a very important Mochica figure.
En las condiciones más difíciles debido al saqueo,
Under the most difficult conditions because of looting,
efectuamos este trabajo.
we were able to accomplish this work.
Pero primero tenemos que aclarar quiénes eran los moche.
But first, I would like to explain who the Moche were.
Los moche fueron uno de los pueblos más importantes del antiguo Perú
They were one of the most important people of ancient Peru
que desarrollaron una alta tecnología
and
de
developed
riego
an
artificial
advanced technology of artificial irrigation
para poder fertilizar los desiertos de la costa peruana.
that enabled them to fertilize the deserts of the Peruvian coastline,
Una cultura de oasis similar a las culturas del Oriente Medio.
a culture which has many aspects which are similar to the Middle Eastern cultures.
El extraordinario excedente productivo permitió desarrollar una cultura
Their extraordinary output allowed them to develop a culture
altamente desarrollada
which was highly developed
con tecnología, con arquitectura monumental.
with monumental architecture,
Cientos de pirámides en la costa peruana son testimonios de este grandioso pasado.
and hundreds of pyramids along the Peruvian coastline are a symbol of
Y los
this grandiose
peruanos
past.
de hoy, aún con toda la maquinaria que estamos premonidos, no podemos superar la capacidad productiva de la tierra que ellos lograron hace más de 1000 años.
And today, with all the tools of modern technology, we are unable to surpass the output that they managed to achieve in their agriculture in the past.
Los moches se desarrollaron más de 1000 años antes que los incas soñaran con conquistar las tierras costeñas del norte.
The Moche culture developed and flourished more than 1,000 years before the Incas ever dreamt of ever conquering that part of the coast.
Develar la tumba de uno de los reyes moche significa develar también todo el compendio de su tecnología y todo el compendio de su arte.
To discover the tomb of a Moche leader is also to discover the information regarding their technology and their past.
La cámara funeraria de 5 metros de lado contenía los restos óseos de un hombre muerto a los 40 años que tenía la cúspide del poder en la costa norte.
The funerary chamber, which is 5 meters long, contained the remains of a 40-year-old man who held a very great power in their culture.
Lo acompañaba un total de 8 concubinas o sirvientes inmediatos.
He was accompanied by 8 concubines or immediate servants.
Y dentro de su ajuar funerario se encontraban ornamentos, estandartes, vestimentas, tocados que usaba en vida y que eran los símbolos de su poder semidivino.
And in his tomb, there were ornaments, there were flag stands, there were dresses, there were headdresses, all a part of his position in the culture.
Los reyes moche tenían poder absoluto sobre sus súbditos.
The Moche kings had absolute power over their subjects.
Y en cada una de las escenas podemos notar este encumbramiento del poder más absoluto.
And in each one of the scenes depicted in their art, we are able to see this power that they had over their people.
A lo largo de cerca de 10 meses hemos develado paso a paso, muy lentamente, el contenido de esta cámara.
It took us 10 months to gradually discover and reveal the context of this funerary chamber.
Por primera vez en la arqueología americana se encontraban ataúdes de madera.
For the first time in American archaeology, we found wooden coffins.
El señor estaba dentro de una caja de madera dura de la costa, labrada finamente, recubierta con telas.
The Lord of Sipan was in a wooden box made from a hard wood found along the coastline.
Y un total de 13 capas de ofrendas y de ornamentos cubrían su osamenta milenaria.
And in a total of 13 layers and offerings covered the body.
El trabajo de excavación para nosotros significaba también un reto científico y un reto metodológico.
The excavation for us was a scientific and a technological challenge.
A través de estos meses de excavación hemos logrado recuperar cerca de 100 objetos de oro, cobre y turquesa.
Throughout all the months of excavation, we have been able to recover 100 objects of gold, copper, and turquoise.
Y algunas huellas de objetos que han desaparecido para siempre, pero que están registrados.
And traces of certain objects that have disappeared forever, but that we have been able to record.
Pero ¿qué significa una tumba de un noble moche?
But what is the significance of finding the tomb of a Moche lord?
Cada uno de los objetos, el orden, su calidad tecnológica y su calidad artística nos habla del alto nivel de desarrollo alcanzado en la época.
Each one of the objects, the order in which they're laid, and their technological and artistic quality tell us something about the culture.
De la religión y de la profunda simbología.
They tell us about the religion and the symbology.
Los moche en esta tumba pusieron como ofrendas funerarias todos los ornamentos que revelaban este avance.
In the tomb, we have been able to find objects that reveal the advancement, the technological and artistic advancement they had.
El oro traído desde la vertiente oriental de los Andes.
The gold was brought from the eastern part of the Andes.
La turquesa desde el norte de Argentina o el sur del Perú.
The turquoise was brought from northern Argentina or southern Peru.
El lapislázuli traído desde Chile.
The lapislázuli was brought from Chile.
Y las conchas de espóndilos desde el Golfo de Guayaquil.
And the spondylus shells from the Gulf of Guayaquil.
Nos revelan por primera vez científicamente el gran ámbito de relaciones culturales y comerciales que tenían las viejas culturas sudamericanas antes de la llegada de los españoles.
Reveal for the first time the extent of trade and economic relationships that existed throughout the Americas before the arrival of Columbus.
Los materiales más exóticos estaban presentes como ofrenda para la tumba de un importante señor que nada tiene que envidiar a los emperadores del viejo mundo.
These rare materials were present in the tomb of this man who has nothing to envy the emperors of the East.
Y en el nivel tecnológico, el más alto grado de desarrollo.
At the technological level, they revealed the high degree of development.
Desarrollaron la fundición de metales, el dorado de metales por una fina capa que cubre los objetos.
They learned plating techniques.
Procedimiento que en Europa recién se inventa en el siglo XVIII.
A procedure that in Europe only came to be known in the 18th century.
La inmensa cantidad de información que nos está revelando esta tumba también alcanza los niveles de interpretación social y religiosa.
The enormous amount of information here allows us to understand the complexities of their social and religious system.
Constituyó un evento muy importante para el mundo moche.
The burials were a very important event in the Moche culture.
Y todos los sirvientes inmediatos debían acompañar al Señor.
And all his immediate servants had to accompany him into death.
De otro lado, también todos sus objetos que usaba en vida.
He was also accompanied by all his personal objects,
los símbolos de su poder,
as well as the symbols of his position.
La disposición de los objetos, el oro al lado derecho hacia donde nace el sol, la plata y el cobre o el metal impuro hacia el lado izquierdo donde muere el sol.
The placement of the objects, the gold objects on the right where the sun rises, the silver objects on the left where the sun dies.
Simbolizan lo positivo, lo negativo, el día y la noche.
Are a symbol of the positive and negative, of day and night.
Esta tumba nos está permitiendo reconstruir el pueblo moche, del cual gran parte todavía es descendiente la nación peruana.
This tomb is allowing us to understand the Moche culture, and many people in Peru today are descendants from these people.
Sin embargo, la investigación de esta tumba recién comienza.
However, the
Son muchos
research of this tomb is just at its inception.
los datos que tendremos que extraer en el futuro de los restos que tenemos ahora recién recuperados.
There is a great deal of information we're going to be able to draw from the remains that we have discovered so far.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
It's a very great pleasure for me to be here on this occasion of the announcement of this tomb that has been so beautifully excavated by Walter Alva and his team of Peruvian archaeologists. My role in this has been rather minor, although for many years I have been studying the Moche people from largely two vantage points. One was the development of an archive of Moche art, a photographic archive at UCLA, which now contains over 125,000 photographs of Moche art from all over the world. And over the years, we've been working with the reconstruction of these people based on artistic representations, combined with our own archaeological research in Peru, excavating the remains of Moche material. Never in my experience was there anything that would suggest that such an extraordinary find as this was in our future. And it's been a real delight to be on hand at times during this extraordinary excavation. A lot of you may be wondering, well, why is this the richest tomb ever excavated archaeologically in the Americas? And this is certainly the way that this tomb has been presented in the wonderful article written by Walter Alva that is one of the highlights of the October issue of National Geographic magazine. I think this is a very appropriate term for the tomb, that it is truly the richest ever found archaeologically in the Americas. There have been other very significant discoveries in Peru, Central America, in Mesoamerica. One can recall the excitement in the archaeological world when the tomb of Pakal was excavated at Palenque, a truly monumental discovery. We also think of the tombs excavated by Alfonso Caso at Monte Alban, particularly Tomb 7, which contained great quantities of gold objects with remarkable craftsmanship. But I would agree with Walter's assessment of this, that this tomb alone far surpasses in the quantity of precious objects and the overall quality of craftsmanship anything that we have ever seen before that has come from scientific excavations. And it's really a tribute to Walter and his team of Peruvian archaeologists that they have captured this information for all of us. The greatest treasure of this tomb, to my mind, however, is really the information that it contains. And I am confident that the scientific world would all agree to that. This has been the joy of this, even surpassing the beauty of these objects or their value. This tomb alone has greatly accelerated our reconstruction of one of the most important of all New World civilizations. And I might point out, from my own perspective, one of the most wonderful aspects was the realization that this particular individual is a person who 10 years before this tomb was found, we had identified in the art, the ancient art of these Moche people. And these people left no writing system, so all that we have to reconstruct the civilization is what they depicted artistically combined with what we can find archaeologically. And through our research with the art style, we had identified specific ceremonies that were conducted by the Moche people, one of which, and one of the most important of which, is a ceremony where they sacrifice prisoners of war. Warfare in Moche culture was an extremely important activity. And it's one that was accompanied with a great deal of fanfare. Elaborately dressed warriors would parade about. We see this in the art. And they would engage in combat with throwing sling stones and spears from a distance and engaging the enemy at close range with war clubs. Then we see scenes in which these prisoners are actually captured on the field of battle. And the appropriate method of capture was to grab the individual and then remove all of his clothing and his ornaments and hang these from your war club. If you were the captor, then you brought this individual back with a rope around his neck and all of his gear hanging from your war club. Then these prisoners were paraded or arraigned in courtly scenes, and ultimately they were brought to an area where they were sacrificed. And their sacrifice involved cutting their throats and taking their blood, which was then presented in tall goblets to various individuals. So this sacrifice ceremony has very specific individuals involved in it. There's recognizable as individuals, say, from Christian art. You could make an analogy to the nativity scene, and everyone recognizes the Christ child, Mary, Joseph, the wise men, on the basis of consistent representations of the individuals involved and the activities. It's the same occurs with moche iconography, the moche art. The consistencies of representations of these various individuals and what they are doing allows us to identify them, specific ones. Well, this tomb, as it turns out, is almost certainly the tomb of a very specific individual who we can identify in moche art, and we could appropriately term him the warrior priest. He is an individual who at the sacrifice ceremony dresses himself in all of the equipment normally worn by warriors. Now we realize that his versions of this equipment were of pure gold. This was something we would never have imagined, but this tomb appears to contain that very individual who dresses as a warrior and is the principal figure at this sacrifice ceremony. If anyone had suggested to me 10 or 15 years ago that the development of our understanding of the moche would reach a point where we could in fact identify an individual represented in this art style from more than 1,000 years ago, and then be on hand to witness the scientific excavation of the tomb of that very individual, I would not have believed it. It's been the greatest pleasure of my professional career to see this happen, and I think the credit is truly to be given to the Peruvian archaeologist Walter Alva, the Institute of Culture in Peru, the team of archaeologists that are working on this project, all of whom are Peruvian, their ability to make this discovery possible and to capture all of the important information that is telling us so very much about this ancient civilization.
Thank you. We'll now take your questions, and if you could raise your hand, let me identify you, and I'll repeat the question so that all can hear it, and then we'll ask the answer. I would like to start the question by asking you to tell us what the gold object is and why their guards are there.
This is an extraordinary piece of pre-Columbian gold. It's a head of an individual done in three-dimensional sculpture. The hair is indicated on the back side. It's actually a gold bead. It is perforated with a double perforation so that two strands would have gone through this and connected it to the other beads on a large necklace. This double perforation of these beads is characteristic of all of the beads that have been found at Sipan. This piece is exquisitely crafted. It is, from what we understand of the analysis of some of these objects, this is 22 karat gold. The eyes are silver, and the pupils of the eyes are circular, they're discs of lapis lazuli. This is the stone that Walter mentioned is brought in from Chile, from northern Chile. So it's a masterpiece of the gold worker's art, and the inlay is truly exquisite.
Could we go to your questions now?
Why was it, how did it turn out that the systematic archaeological work in the area had not turned up hints that this tomb was there, but in fact it was the looters who did? And could you say a little bit more about how the finding of some of the objects on the black market, how that led to tracing them to the specific place where the tomb was found?
Question is, how did the systematic archaeological study fail to come up with the location of the tomb which looters discovered, and how did the work in retrieving stolen objects play into the discovery and exploration of this tomb?
Es una pregunta muy importante porque toca la esencia y el problema principal de la arqueología peruana.
That's a very important question because it touches on the very essence of the problems that Peruvian archaeology has run into.
Los arqueólogos conocemos donde hay con bastante probabilidad tumbas importantes.
As archaeologists, we know where it is very likely that we are going to find important tombs.
El problema es que no tenemos los recursos para la excavación sistemática que demanda una ingente inversión.
The problem is that we don't have the resources required for a scientific excavation of the site.
En febrero del año pasado, los profanadores que son muy activos y muy rápidos
In February of last year, the grave robbers, who are very active and very fast,
saquearon una tumba de la plataforma funeraria de Zipán.
looted one of the tombs in the funerary platform of Sipan.
Este hecho creó una situación de saqueo masivo
This brought about massive looting
en la población del lugar.
by the population of the area.
El escándalo y el problema nos sirvió para hacer un trabajo arqueológico de emergencia.
The scandal that this brought about helped us to be able to do emergency archaeological work, if you wish,
consiguiendo pequeños recursos
obtaining small amounts of funds
que permitieron excavar científicamente la primera tumba importante del antiguo Perú.
which allowed us to scientifically excavate the first tomb that was excavated in this way in Peru.
Este hecho nos pone en evidencia dos cosas.
This points to two things.
La primera, que los arqueólogos tenemos que pensar en obtener los recursos necesarios del país o de países amigos para excavar científicamente los pocos tumbas o los pocos restos arquitectónicos que quedan en el Perú.
And that is that as archaeologists, we absolutely must find the funds, either in Peru or from friendly nations, to excavate the few remaining untouched tombs that still exist in Peru.
Y por otro lado, que los gobiernos de Perú y de los países del hemisferio occidental
And that, on the other hand, the government of Peru and of the countries of the Western Hemisphere
tienen que suscribir convenios para frenar definitivamente el saqueo de los bienes culturales.
have to sign agreements to put a stop once and for all to the looting of this national patrimony.
Porque si no hay demanda en el mercado,
Because,
tampoco hay saqueo.
because if there were to be no demand in the market, then there would be no reason for looting.
Next question. Yes, sir.
In the excellent presentation that Dr. Alva and Dr. Donas have given, they have concentrated on the golden pieces found. As we know, the desert of Peru in some sections are the driest in the world, drier than the Sahara Desert. And we have seen that in other civilizations, textiles have been preserved, like the one that is being shown at the United Nations, 1,000 years before Christ. My question leads to probably because of lack of time, you have not mentioned the findings of perhaps cereals, petrified Alvas, which is in the United States called lima beans. And my question concentrates on this point that have been touched by another archaeologist, Largo Oile, who's in his book, published some years ago, stresses the fact that Dr. Donan has mentioned the possibility, his hypothesis, that the Moche civilization indeed had writing in the lima beans with symbols and other lines that he has discovered and that were discussed by other archaeologists such as John P. Gillen, later Dean of the University of Pittsburgh, Christian Ross from the University of Utah, Alden Mason, curator of the University of Pennsylvania, and Hans Horkheimer, professor of archaeology of the University of Trujillo. So the point of my question is whether these findings of cereal were found along with the golden pieces, and what about the idea that perhaps the Moche did have beginning of writing.
Let me summarize. The question is, is there a possibility that Moches had writing, and did you find other things other than gold artifacts from the tomb?
Voy a contestar parte de la pregunta, la otra que es sobre la escritura, me parece importante que la conteste el doctor Donan.
I'm going to answer part of the question, and the part of your question related to writing I'm going to allow Mr. Donan to answer.
En la excavación de esta tumba hemos encontrado muchos restos calcinados de ofrendas de alimentos.
In these tombs, we have found many calcinated remains of foodstuffs.
Pero las condiciones del suelo, la humedad reinante en el lugar, no han permitido una buena conservación.
But soil conditions, the humidity of the site, have not allowed it to preserve properly.
Sin embargo, en cerca de 1,300 vasijas que forman parte de todo este conjunto de la tumba,
however, in approximately 1,300 pots, which are a part of what we found in the tomb,
puede notarse la presencia de restos orgánicos, restos de comidas y bebidas,
we can find traces of remains of food and drink,
contenidas en estas vasijas.
which was in these pots.
Es posible que los análisis especializados puedan identificar qué restos contenían esta inmensa cantidad de vasijas.
It is possible that scientific studies will be able to determine precisely what foodstuff was originally to be found in these pots.
Entre las ofrendas, como un dato muy curioso, se encontraron también algunas representaciones en piedra de los famosos tallares con diseños que se ha sugerido puedan ser restos de escultura.
It is interesting to note that we have found in the tomb representations in stone figures of these lima beans that you just mentioned with those lines.
Sin embargo, parece también que puede tratarse de una especie de fichas de un juego.
However, there is also the theory that these might be pieces of a game.
En fin, creo que el doctor Donan puede aclarar un poco más.
I think that Mr. Donan could shed some more light on this.
The idea that the the Moche people may have had a writing system is really a very interesting one, and it's one that has caused a great deal of research by scholars working with the iconography and also with the archaeologically excavated remains of the Moche people. The idea, as you mentioned, is one that originated with the research of Rafael Larco Hoyle, a well-known Peruvian scholar, and he made a very strong case for the possibility that this was something of a writing system. In the art, we see elaborately dressed figures who are, we call them the bean runners. They are running along carrying pouches, leather bags, apparently filled with lima beans. And in the art, the representations of these individuals kind of floating up over their head are a series of lima beans with distinct markings on them. And then in other scenes, you see a series of these runners kind of spiraling around, let's say, the chamber of a ceramic bottle. And then seated on top of the bottle is an individual who is examining a lima bean that has these kinds of marks on it. In other instances, we see lima beans between two seated individuals, and we see a series of sticks that these individuals seem to be tossing out. So far, it is not possible for us to confirm or deny that they may have had a writing system. My own feeling is one of some doubt. I do think that there was something being related symbolically on these beans, but I doubt that it was the precursor of any writing system of the type we normally think of. They may have been able to indicate information in this way. This may have been something having to do with divination, or, as Walter Alva has mentioned, some sort of game or ceremonial game. But I don't believe that the evidence is pointing in the direction of it being an incipient writing system.
Question here.
I would like Dr. Alva to address how the attendants in the grave died, if there's any indications, and also the amputation of the feet on a couple of the individuals.
Question is, how did the attendants who were found buried in the tomb die? And also, would you explain the amputation of the feet of one?
El estado de conservación de los huesos no permite un análisis muy preciso para identificar cuál es el tipo de muerte que tuvieron.
The state of preservation of the bones does not allow us to determine precisely what the cause of death was.
Por lo menos hasta hoy no hemos podido reconocer señales de violencia.
At least up to now, we have been able to find no evidence of violence.
De otro lado, la tradición recogida por los cronistas
On the other hand, the tradition related by the Spanish writers
menciona que cuando muere un gobernante muy importante,
mentioned that when a very important government leader died,
lo acompañan también en su viaje al más allá sus mujeres y los personajes principales allegados.
he is accompanied to the life beyond by his wife and by his immediate servants.
En este caso, en la tumba, hemos encontrado hasta 8 esqueletos.
In this instance, we have found as many as 8 skeletons in the tomb,
El esqueleto de un perro
as well as the skeleton of a dog,
y debajo 2 esqueletos de llamas.
and below them the skeletons of 2 llamas. Y la amputación
The
de la
amputation.
En el caso, esto es muy importante porque este hallazgo del primer guardián con los pies amputados
This is very important because this discovery of the guard with his feet amputated
fue corroborado con la excavación reciente de una segunda tumba que se encuentra actualmente en proceso de develación.
was validated with the excavation of a second tomb that is now in the process of being excavated. Pero no sabemos por qué.
Any indications what that might mean?
Es sin duda una amputación ritual que bien podría tener el significado de que con los pies cortados el individuo no podía abandonar su puesto de vigilancia.
It is undoubtedly a ritual cutting off of the feet, and it might be interpreted as meaning that since he couldn't walk because he didn't have any feet, he would not be able to abandon his post.
Question here.
Yes, it was mentioned seizure by U.S. Customs that ultimately helped lead to this discovery. Could you explain that? And also, I noticed in the magazine it says there's a missing twin for that head, and it's still out on the black market.
It's two questions. One, could you discuss the customs seizure? And also, the magazine article mentions a companion head to that artifact. Could you discuss that?
Como mencioné hace un momento, la primera noticia que tuvimos de este mausoleo real se debió a la excavación de una tumba profanada por los saqueadores.
As I said before, the first indication that we had of this tomb was because of the artifacts that were found by the looters.
Parte de los objetos de esa tumba fueron recuperados por la policía peruana.
Part of the artifacts of this tomb were captured by the Peruvian police.
Y probablemente el 80% se ofreció en venta en el mercado de antigüedades del Perú y del extranjero.
And probably 80% of the artifacts were sold in the antique market of Peru and of other countries.
Se conoce que hace algunos meses la aduana de Los Ángeles ha capturado un importante conjunto de objetos de arte, entre los que aparentemente habrían algunas piezas de la primera tumba.
The customs of Los Angeles has seized an important cache of artifacts, among which we believe are some of the important objects belonging to this tomb.
Justamente gracias a las coordinaciones que ha establecido la Embajada Peruana y el Consulado en Los Ángeles,
thanks to the talks that have been going on between the Embassy of Peru and the customs in Los Angeles,
habrá oportunidad que en los próximos 2 días pueda personalmente ver los objetos e identificar si corresponden o no corresponden al saqueo de Zipán.
I will personally have the chance of examining the objects and determining whether any of these objects in fact belongs to the tomb in Zipán.
In the back.
Mr. Alva, could you address the resentment of the local population? They have the feeling that you were essentially no different from the grave robbers?
Could you address the resentment of the local populations? Did you have the feeling they felt that you were no different from the grave robbers?
La población local estaba fuertemente incentivada y motivada por el hallazgo de esta fabulosa primera tumba hecha por los saqueadores. Gran parte de los pobladores participaron en recoger los despojos, pequeños objetos de metal o cerámica que dejaron los saqueadores en su huida precipitada.
The population was very much involved in the recovery of the objects stolen by the looters, and in fact did help us to recover some of the minor things, some of the smaller objects which were left or dropped by the looters as they escaped.
Pero sin duda la población campesina estaba sobre todo incentivada por los traficantes locales que promueven con su demanda el saqueo de las antiguas tumbas.
However, there's no doubt that the population receives even greater encouragement from dealers who are offering very important economic incentives for them to sell artifacts to them.
Sin embargo, en los últimos meses el sentimiento de la población está cambiando.
However, in the past few months, their view has been changing. They've begun to see things differently.
Y nosotros estamos también luchando para que la población comprenda que estamos recuperando un tesoro cultural de la nación peruana.
And we are doing everything in our power to make them understand that what we're doing is to recover a national treasure, a treasure that belongs to all Peruvians.
Question here.
Some of the references
Question is, was the person in the tomb royal or priestly or both, or can you explain that?
Examinando los ornamentos
By examining the ornaments
y las vestimentas del primer personaje que está presentado en el artículo,
and the garments of the first figure, the one that appears in the article,
podemos reconocer en él a un jefe guerrero.
we can recognize in him
Es el
a
término
warrior leader.
más simple que podemos llamarlo.
That's the simplest term we could use in describing him.
Desde la apertura de su tumba había armas, símbolos de la guerra y el cuchillo de sacrificios en la mano derecha como símbolo más absoluto de su poder para quitar la vida a los prisioneros.
And as soon as we opened the tomb, we found all sorts of weapons and other symbols of war. He held in his right hand the ritual knife, which gave him the power of life and death over his prisoners.
Parece que la guerra era una de las actividades muy importantes en el pueblo moche.
War seems to have been one of the most important activities among the Moche people.
Y el hallazgo de una segunda tumba que está en plena excavación,
And the discovery of a second tomb that we are excavating right now,
a pesar de no ser tan rica como la primera,
despite not being as rich as the first one,
en objetos metálicos obviamente,
in terms of metallic objects,
nos refleja que aparentemente estamos encontrando otro personaje de la jerarquía moche, esta vez un sacerdote.
seems to indicate that we have found a second important figure in the Moche culture. In this instance, it would seem to be a priest.
Y en la medida que se puedan seguir develando otras tumbas de este mausoleo real,
And as we are able to open up other tombs which are part of this mausoleum,
podremos reconstruir con mayor fidelidad
we will be able to reconstruct more precisely
la sociedad moche.
what Moche society was like.
I might add, if I may, just an observation. It would appear that to the Moche people, there was no division between economic and military and priestly or religious power. These seem to have been merged in the upper echelons of Moche society and the overall power structure of this culture. It was interesting once we realized that this individual from the tomb was clearly so precisely identical to the individual that we had identified in Moche iconography. We went back to the archive with the question, is there anyone shown in Moche art who we could say is of higher status or greater power than this individual who officiates at the sacrifice ceremony? And there really isn't. This person, if he is not the very pinnacle of Moche political, religious, and military power, he's right up there near the very top.
All right, Warren?
On the photograph, you see the eroded pyramids at the site. So do you have any indication what the upper structure of this tomb might have looked like?
Photographs show the eroded pyramids at the site. Do you have any indication what the upper structure might have been like?
La erosión se debe al material de construcción, adobe, que es afectado por las ocasionales y casi cíclicas lluvias de cada 50 o 100 años en la costa norte del Perú.
The erosion is due to the building material, which is adobe, and which has been affected by the rare and almost cyclical rainfall that occurs along the coast of Peru, which only happens about once every 50 or 100 years.
Sin embargo, la forma arquitectónica original puede reconocerse.
However, it is possible to identify the original structure.
Y se trata de pirámides o plataformas escalonadas, truncas,
And these are truncated pyramids with steps.
accesibles hasta la cima por un sistema de rampas.
And it
de
is
acceso.
possible to reach the top through a system of ramps.
Let's get a question on the back here.
In the article or the folder that we haven't discussed the fact that he went on a
Question has to do with a report of the pre-dawn discovery and the death of one of the looters. Could you describe that morning and that incident?
El problema de la intervención policial
The problem of the raid
se sucede desde febrero, en que la policía hace la primera requisa de objetos en la casa de un miembro de la banda.
It goes back to the month of February when the police seized the objects at the home of one of the members of this band.
Y teniendo la certeza de que se trataba de aparentemente el 10 o el 20% solamente de los objetos.
And there was the certainty existed that this represented only about 10 or 20% of what had already been taken.
De una tumba muy importante saqueada.
Taken from a very important tomb that had been looted.
La policía estaba tratando de hacer todos los esfuerzos para capturar a los demás integrantes de la banda.
So the police was doing everything in their power to capture the remaining members of this band.
Y recuperar los objetos.
And thus recover the objects.
Just an observation, it would appear that to the Moche people, there was no division between economic and military and priestly or religious power. These seem to have been merged in the upper echelons of Moche society and the overall power structure of this culture. It was interesting once we realized that this individual from the tomb was clearly so precisely identical to the individual that we had identified in Moche iconography. We went back to the archive with the question, is there anyone shown in Moche art who we could say is of higher status or greater power than this individual who officiates at the sacrifice ceremony? And there really isn't. This person, if he is not the very pinnacle of Moche political, religious, and military power, he's right up there near the very top.
All right, Warren.
In the photographs, we see the eroded pyramids at the site. Do you have any indication what the upper structure of this tomb might have looked like?
Photographs show the eroded pyramids at the site. Do you have any indication what the upper structure might have been like?
La erosión se debe al material de construcción, adobe, que es afectado por las ocasionales y casi cíclicas lluvias de cada 50 o 100 años en la costa norte del Perú.
The erosion is due to the building material, which is adobe, and which has been affected by the rare and almost cyclical rainfall that occurs along the coast of Peru, which only happens about once every 50 or 100 years.
Sin embargo, la forma arquitectónica original puede reconocerse.
However, it is possible to identify the original structure.
Y se trata de pirámides o plataformas escalonadas, truncas.
And these are truncated pyramids with steps.
Accesibles hasta la cima por un sistema de rampas.
And it is possible to reach the top through a system of ramps.
Let's get a question on the back here.
There's in the article or the tour that was given, it discusses the fact that you went on a pre-dawn raid discovery and that one of the looters was killed in that. Could you describe what that evening upon your discovery was?
Question has to do with a report of the pre-dawn discovery and the death of one of the looters. Could you describe that morning and that incident?
El problema de la intervención policial
The problem of the raid
se sucede desde febrero, en que la policía hace la primera requisa de objetos en la casa de un miembro de la banda.
It goes back to the month of February when the police seized the objects at the home of one of the members of this band.
Y teniendo la certeza de que se trataba de aparentemente el 10 o el 20% solamente de los objetos.
And there was the certainty existed that this represented only about 10 or 20% of what had already been taken.
De una tumba muy importante saqueada.
Taken from a very important tomb that had been looted.
La policía estaba tratando de hacer todos los esfuerzos para capturar a los demás integrantes de la banda.
So the police was doing everything in their power to capture the remaining members of this band.
Y recuperar los objetos.
And thus recover the objects.
En una de estas tantas intervenciones policiales,
in one of the many police raids,
se produce el desenlace trágico un día de abril del año pasado.
We had the tragic outcome of April of last year.
Obviamente las circunstancias precisas solamente las conoce la policía.
However, the precise details are only known by the police.
Question here.
Why is it that many of us, maybe most of us, never heard of Moche culture before this?
And why is it that, Dr. Donan, that many or most of us have never heard of the Moche culture before?
That's an excellent question. Having worked on this culture for most of my professional career and finding it so fascinating and so immediately appealing through its art style and all of the exquisite technology of these people and what they created, it's surprising to me that they are not more well known. Very often North Americans will be aware of the Aztec and the Maya and the Inca, but what we don't realize is that the Western Hemisphere had a much more complex and wondrous story in terms of the development of civilizations, and many of these are in every way as worthy of study and admiration as the Inca, Maya, and Aztec. I am confident that with this find and the wonderful publicity that this has received and will receive through National Geographic and your help, people will become much more aware of this civilization which preceded the Inca by more than 1,000 years. But you should also realize this isn't the only other one that we didn't know about. There are literally scores of groups who created wondrous art styles and really must take their place in our understanding of the rise of civilization throughout the world. Particularly, I think this is important for North Americans to realize that in our own hemisphere, civilizations developed and we should become much more aware of them.
The footnote editor, Garrett, points out that the National Geographic ran its first article on the Moche in 1947, which is probably before you were born, but we'll get you a membership application in case you missed anything else. We have probably run out of the time we should spend in a general press conference. What I want to do is ask that we take a break and give Jeff Deering an opportunity to escort the ambassador and his colleagues and the minister to the exhibit in the adjacent building. If you members of the press will stay, or if you'd like to stay a little longer, then we'd ask Dr. Alva and Dr. Donan to take you through the exhibit, and you can ask questions as we go along. All right? Thank you very much for coming, and would you just hold your place a moment for Jeff to escort the ambassador and his group. Questions as we form up here, please feel free to.